Hey, I hope everybody's having a happy Monday. This is going to be the start of our week 2 lesson. I also hope that everybody had a great weekend, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. So, as we were working with fractions last week, we're going to continue doing that, but we're going to be adding in decimals. And as we know, if we think back to that place value, we know that decimals can be turned into fractions, all right, and vice versa. Our fractions can also be turned into decimals. So we're going to be using that skill that we have learned in order to help us when we are multiplying our fractions. All right, so I'm just going to do a quick reintroduction of how we multiply it with our decimals. All right, so we all know 3 times 2 is 6. All right, but this time we've got 3 times 2 tenths. And we know this is 2 tenths because if we look to the right of our decimal point, that first place value is the tenths place. And we know that our 0 is in the ones place. So we already know that 3 times 2 is 6. And when we look at that decimal point positioning, we know that it is 1 behind our 2. So I'm going to add a decimal point 1 behind my 6. So now we know that 3 times 2 tenths equals 6 tenths. All right? For number 3, we've got 3 tenths times 2 tenths. All right? 3 times 2, once again, is 6. But this time, we've got 2 decimal points. So we know that we moved 1 decimal positioning, and we moved another decimal positioning. So we've got to do the same. Move 1 and 2. And we know that we always fill in with a 0. So now, 3 tenths times 2 tenths is equal to 6 hundredths. All right, 10 times 10 equals 100. So we've now shifted decimal places. All right, as we know that our 0, which is 1 to the right of our decimal point, is in the tenths place, and we move 1 over, that's our hundredths place. For the last one, we've got 3 hundredths times 2 tenths. Once again, 3 times 2 equals 6. So I'm going to place that here. But now we've got to look at that decimal placement. We know this decimal point has moved over 1 position. But when we look at this number, it's moved over how many? 1, 2. So altogether, we've moved a total of 3 places. So I'm going to start at the end of my 6, and we're going to move back 1, 2, and 3. And we all know that we've got to fill in with our zeros. So now our 6 is in the tenths, hundredths, and thousandths place, because we know that 100 times 10 is equal to 1,000. All right, so that was just a brief intro to what we're going to work with and how our place value is going to help us today. All right, so as we just discussed, we know that we're going to be looking at our tenths place because each of these numbers ends at the tenths place. All right, so the question that we're going to be answering is how many tenths are there? For the first one, we've got 0.5 or 5 tenths. All right. Now, the next one, we've got 1 and 2 tenths, but we know that once we get a total of 10 tenths, then we're going to create a whole, all right? Because 10 tenths is equal to 1 whole. So this is how we got that. Then we've got 2 tenths left over. So 10 plus that other 2/10 is equal to 12/10. So that's how we've gotten 12/10. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. We've got 3 and 5/10. So we know that this would be 35/10. All right, and if we needed to write that as a fraction, it would just be 35/10. Okay, 12/10 would be 12/10, and 5/10 we know would be 5/10. So this is the process that we're going to be using in order to change our decimals into fractions when we are multiplying. So we're going to go ahead and do an example. Our first example, we've got 0.1 or 1/10 times 4. All right, so the first thing we've got to do is change this into a decimal. We already stated that 1 place value positioning over is the 10th place. So we know that this is 1/10. All right, and we've got to multiply that by 4. All right, whenever we are multiplying, all we're doing is multiplying across. And I always tell you guys, what is a number that we can divide a 4 by for it to stay the same number. All right, so anytime we divide something and we want it to stay that same number, we've got to divide it by 1. All right, so if you need that visual, if you need to make this 4 into a fraction, just go ahead and put that 1 underneath it. So now when we're multiplying, we multiply straight across in the numerator and straight across in the denominator. So if we're working with the numerator, we know those numbers are 1 and 4. So 1 times 4 is equal to 4. And now we're working in the denominator. 10 times 1 is equal to 10. So we know that 1/10 times 4 is equal to 4/10. Awesome. We're going to go ahead and do 2 more examples. For our first one, we've got 1 and 2/10 times 1/10. And if you remember what we've just gone over, we're going to keep this as a fraction of tenths. So if you're looking, we know that 10/10 once again is equal to 1 whole. This is where we've got our 1 whole from. And we've got 2/10 left over. So we know that 10 plus 2 is equal to 12. So we've now created 12/10. All right. So this is how we've gotten 12/10 from 1 and 2/10. But we've got to multiply that by 0.1. Once again, our decimal point, or our 1, is 1 placement after our decimal point. So we know that that is in the 10th place. So we're multiplying 12/10 by 1/10. All right? When we multiply across in our numerator, we've got 12 times 1, and that equals 12. And then here comes that tricky part. We then have to multiply our denominator. This does not stay 10. All right, so 10 times 10 is 100. So the new fraction in our answer that we have created is 12/100ths. So we know that 1 and 2/10 times 1/10 is equal to 12/100ths. All right, now our last example, we've got 1 and 5/10 times 100th. We are no longer in the 10th place. Our 1 is now 2 place values to the right of our decimal. So we're not working with the tenths place, we're working with the hundredths place. So this is why I said you've got to remember that place value positioning to help you when you are converting your decimal into a fraction. All right? So we're using that same method here. We've got 1 and 5/10. So we know we're going to change this into 15/10. All right? But now, remember, we've got to pay attention. We're working in the hundredths place. So now we've got 1/100th. So now we're able to multiply. Remember, we're multiplying across in the numerator and multiplying across in the denominator. So we've got 15 times 1, that's 15. And we've got 10 times 100. Okay, and if you remember our trick, we multiply our 1s and then we can add our 0s later. We know 1 times 1 is 1. We've got to make this easy math. And then we can just count how many zeros we've got left over. We've got 1, 0, 2, and 3. So I'm going to go ahead and add those 3 to the 1 that I multiplied. So in the end, the fraction that we've gotten for our answer is 15 thousandths. All right, so we know that 1 and 5/10 times 100th is 15 thousandths. All right, so for your assignment today, you're going to be working on converting those decimals to fractions so that you can multiply as we just did.